On this week's episode, I'm joined by Hugo Goncalves. Hugo was born and raised in Portugal. He's a writer and a former journalist. And after spending time in New York, Madrid, and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, came back home to Portugal. And Hugo is also the head writer for the well-known and popular series on Netflix, Rabo de Peixe, or Turn of the Tide. We discuss, amongst other things, some of Hugo's memories of growing up in Portugal, the culture in Portugal of telling stories and how we tell stories to make sense of reality. Hugo talks about what he appreciates about Portugal in terms of scale and safety, why he came back to Portugal after stints in Brazil, New York, and Madrid, and came back to Portugal to be more grounded. We speak about Sardines, and of course we talk about the hit series Rabo de Peixe. For those of you listening, head over to our YouTube channel to watch some of this episode. And for those of you watching, click down below and subscribe. And for the full podcast episode, head over to Stitcher, Google, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And now over to my interesting conversation with Hugo. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life. And it's really an honor to be joined here by Hugo Goncalves. Hugo, bon dia. Thank you for being on the podcast. How are you?
You're welcome. I'm very well. It's a beautiful spring day in Lisbon.
Hugo, why don't you start off telling us a little bit about yourself?
I was born in Sintra, which is a very unique, peculiar village in Lisbon. I went to study in Lisbon when I finished high school, and though now when I look back there. And a few weeks ago, I went back to Estoril, and there's all this emotional patrimony from your childhood in teenage years. Every corner, every street has a memory.
So you experienced real saudades.
Yes.
And what were the things pulling you back, Hugo? What were the things that were?
Well, I guess some things were external and some things were internal. Sure. I was tired of living in Brazil. It had been 4 years. It's Rio. I lived in New York, Madrid, and Rio, 3 very big cities, very intense. If I wanted to be the writer that I wanted to be and the person that I wanted to be, I had to be more grounded. I had experience. It's like I had traveled, I had experience. I think there's a time for it, but also there's a time in your life where you kind of cross this imaginary arch where you stop fantasizing about the future, which is very typical of youth. Where I'm gonna go, what I'm gonna do with my life, whatever. So we're always thinking about the future, and there's this arch in your life, maybe call it middle age, I don't know, where you also feel compelled to look back to how did I get here. Not only you, but your parents, your grandparents, so I felt that I had crossed that arch, and I needed to think more about who I was rather than be looking for experiences one after the other. And so that relationship ended. I came back to Portugal.
What were some of those things with your travels where you thought, yeah, actually, you know what we've got back home is pretty good? Were there any things that you kind of that were revealed to you along the way that you thought it's pretty good back home?
Well, two things just come to mind. One is like scale and safety, but it's the right scale. The traffic, cars outside, the noise compared to other cities that I lived, it's more mellow, it's easier. You can walk, you can ride your bike, even though there's hills, but you can still move around. It's not a big city, so I like the scale of it. There's a human scale to it, and it's still like it was not when I left the first time in 2001. Now it's a cosmopolitan city. And the other thing is something I was never able to value as I was growing up, which is being safe. And when I lived in Brazil, I understood that.
How did that influence you to become the writer that you are today?
I was always like that. I was always trying to read new things. I was there weren't that many books in my house. My father was not a big reader, But I remember as a young, watching news on TV, buying newspapers at a really young age. I was curious about the world. Something that I cannot honestly see where did it come from. But I think it's if you want to be a writer, or if you want to be writing about human nature and this horrific and at the same time magnificent thing of being alive, if you want to do that, you have to be curious. You have to leave your comfort zone. You have to understand other people.
This passing on of stories is something that still seems to exist in our culture, and it's a beautiful thing. And I know it's not unique to Portugal, but it is very rich in Portugal. I mean, do you think that helped you as a writer? Do you think that kind of sparked creativity, or helped you to be able to tell a story in a different way?
I don't know. I think, like you said, it's not unique to Portugal. Telling stories is our way of making sense, of the chaotic and the things that we cannot control. So sometimes it's like a game of mirrors, where by telling a story, we understand something about our nature, about the people around us. And since the beginning of time, humans have been telling stories. It's almost like drinking water or eating. It's almost essential for our condition as human beings. So I'm just like musicians have an ear that is kind of tuned to get music and harmonies. My ear is tuned to dialogue. When I listen to something, to a good sentence, I was like, oh, I write it down, this is good. And sometimes when I'm writing, it just shows up. The colloquial, the slang. I'm always very attentive to it. So as a writer, I like to go from in the same page, if needed, from the very or I hope erudite, literary expression of my language, and then a dialogue where you have a street guy talking slang to another guy. I love that, because language is everything. Language is from Camões, the poet from the 16th century, to the guy that is selling DVDs on the corner, whatever. So I see language as this amazing assemble of notes that you can go and take.
Yeah.
But you mentioned sardines, and it's funny because, I'm sorry, the other day I was trying to explain to an American friend the sardine. It's a cheap fish, not that much anymore, but it is.
Yeah.
And it's very fishy, the way the Americans usually say that. When I was waiting on tables, a woman said, "Is the fish fishy?" And was like, it comes from the sea and it's a fish. What do you expect?
Yeah.
And of course, what she was saying, as a Portuguese, I like fish that tastes like fish. What she was saying is like, I want like a fish that it's white, it doesn't taste that much like
Doesn't
fish.
have that smell.
Yeah. But and I was trying to explain the sardine, and it was difficult because there are certain things, and this kind of ties up our conversation. The saudade, the coming back. There's this emotional patrimony that is mainly accumulated during your childhood and teenage years, that's related to the place where you were brought up. And if you had a happy childhood, that is imprinted with the force and with the color that lasts for the rest of your life. So many people with dementia, they don't remember what they did yesterday, but they still remember things from the childhood. So the sardine, I remember once in New York, a German illustrator, she had an orange and she said, "How do you say this in Portuguese?" And I said, "Laranja." And she said, "As long as you live in New York, you might live here for the rest of your life, an orange will never be a laranja."
You're also the main writer for a very popular series at the moment, Rabo de Peixe. We were talking about sardines, so it's a good segue into talking about fish. I mean, without spoilers, and obviously I know that there's certain things you can and can't say, but tell people who don't know a bit about what this story is about, because the story is amazing.
The premise is it's a real story. It happened in the summer of 2001, and two Italian mafiosi, were traveling in a sailboat from Venezuela to the Canary Islands in Spain, and they had a problem in their boat, and they had to go into port in São Miguel de Azores. The thing was, we don't know for sure, but they had hundreds, maybe thousands of kilos of pure cocaine inside the boat. So they could not risk going into port with that amount of cocaine. So they were able to put the cocaine like inside a cave in the rocks. They went to port, but then there was a storm and the cocaine just spread out throughout the coast. We're talking about a kilo was worth around 60,000 euros, maybe more. And we're talking about especially Rabo de Peixe, but the Azores for the ones who don't know, it's an archipelago, 9 islands between America and Europe, between Portugal and America. So Rabo de Peixe, which is a fishing village, people that were making 20 euros a day going out fishing, very dangerous, hard work, all of a sudden had 60,000 euros on their hands. And to encapsulate the spirit of the story, this was told by someone that was there and told us. We interviewed a lot of people. He said this, and we kind of use this sentence in the series. He said, "Look, there were two kinds of people back then: the ones that used their nose and the ones that used their head. The ones that use their nose are not with us anymore. The ones that use their head, they have very nice houses right now around Rabo de Peixe."
How do you write that? I mean, because it's something that's almost a bit of a culture shock for us in Portugal, that something like this could happen.
Well, we had in our favorite time that happened more than 20 years ago. So usually you say tragedy plus time equals comedy. And there was a tragic aspect to it. People destroy their lives with their coke, and but you have time. So we had the time. We're not back then, this happened a lot. So a long time ago. So it was the premise was there. So everything was there, the odd aspect of a poor village getting all this coke, the Italian. So you have the three groups. You have the locals, you have the Italians that in our story go back to recover the coke, and then you have the police. So we have this triangle of cat and mouse chasing each other, and so it was the ingredients were there. We just had to cook them.
But finally, Hugo, a question that we ask all of our guests: Portugal, the simple life. Why?
Well, I think it's a trick question, because life in Portugal can be very complicated for some people. I know what you mean, of course. I know the context. I know what you mean. I think I lived abroad. I think that Portugal is living probably the best time since I was alive. People from everywhere, from Southeast Asia, from Europe. I love that. I love living in a place where cultures meet and they live in peace. So if you're looking for it, I think it's a good place to live. Yes, I agree with you.
It's a great answer. Thank you so much.
And
Hugo, thank you for being on the podcast. I love this conversation. And
me too. Thank you for having me. That's a wrap.
So thank you once again to our guest, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We always love to hear from you. Don't forget, Portugal The Simple Life also has a magazine, so download it. It's for free. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, and as we say in Portugal, sejas bem-vindo. Welcome to The Simple Life.